Hey everyone, this is Daria Silvestro and
Allie Emmerich.
we're here to talk to you about the Classroom Vision assignment that's due on October 9th, 2016. And this is your first draft of the vision that you'll be submitting. So first, we always like to start with purpose. And as many of you already know, vision is about setting a destination that you're driving towards with your kiddos. And we know that in order to do that, you need to develop that vision in partnership with your kids and be clear about where you're headed so that you can be as strategic as possible during the year. For grading, this is a 50-point scale score assignment. So different than credit, no credit, a scale score means that you can receive different scores depending on your proficiency on the rubric. So we're going to spend some time looking at the rubric during this video. And we want to highlight a couple of things. First, we know that it takes time to get to know your students and families well enough that a vision feels truly responsive to their needs and interests. And so in the spirit of that, we're only going to grade 2 out of the 4 broader outcomes so that you have the time to dig in and focus on those areas. Because it's a learning process and it takes time. And so we'll talk about a little bit later about how you're going to select the 2 broader outcomes that you're going to be graded on, even though we invite you to include any or all notes you have about all 4 broader outcomes. You're just going to be choosing 2 that are going to be formally graded. And then next semester, when you submit your second draft, we'll be grading all 4. So as a reminder, from Institute and from orientation, these are the 4 broader outcomes. Academic growth, that's focused on academically, how have your students grown over the course of the year? What did they learn? Personal growth is really about your students' mindsets, behaviors, orientations to school. So things like grit and perseverance would be captured there. Social, political, cultural consciousness, so helping our students to understand identity, problems in the world, social justice. Certainly this year is a good one for political knowledge. And so that's a piece that we saw a lot of excitement about during orientation. So we're excited to see what your visions look like there. And then access is focused on opening doors to opportunity. So this can be very academic in thinking about what courses do your students need to be prepared for college, or it could look like things like increasing attendance at your school, because we know that attendance strongly impacts students' persistence through high school and college. And we're going to dig in deeper to what the rubrics look like for each of these 4 in just a second. And that second is now. So quickly, we're going to go through and you can take time to look at this rubric on your own. It's already uploaded in Blackboard and Google Classroom. So today we're just going to focus on the meets expectations piece. And you can see how the language differs slightly for exceeds expectations. But we truly believe that every one of you can meet expectations for 2 out of these 4 that you'll be graded on. So for academic growth, we're looking for your vision to include rigorous and feasible goals. And that's not just us saying, yeah, I think that's rigorous or I think that's feasible, but you need to be able to articulate why it's rigorous and why you think it's feasible. So for example, you might say, I want my students to average a 21 on the ACT by the end of the year, because last year students at our school were able to average a 20, and I think we can increase that average by 1 point. So that would be an argument for rigorous and feasible. And then again, like, you'll want to include guidance from either your school or Teach for America. And you'll want to reference important skills or mindsets that connect to that content area or to that goal. So for example, an academic skill would be reading comprehension, for example. If you're a 3rd grade teacher and your students are moving from learning to read to reading to learn, then reading comprehension is an important academic skill for your students to know in order to meet their reading growth goal, as an example. So you need to have the goals that are rigorous and feasible, but you also need to reference some skills or mindsets that would connect to that academic growth. Next up, we have personal growth. And like we talked about before, those are the kinds of traits and mindsets that you believe are important to future student success. So you would need to identify those specifically. So you wouldn't want to just say, like, my students will work harder by the end of the year. You want to be more specific about they will persevere in reading for longer periods of time, or they will demonstrate grit in math by working on difficult assignments before asking for help from the teacher. And that gets to the second piece here that says the vision describes what it would look like for students to embody the traits and mindsets. But you might not have a clear progression throughout the year. If you want to go for the gold for exceeds expectations, you would actually lay out what would it look like throughout the year for students to develop perseverance. So in first quarter, it might be that students understand what perseverance is and how it can help them succeed. And then by the end of the year, they're actually demonstrating traits like trying to struggle through problems before asking for help, or retaking a test that they didn't do well on. And if you have more questions about what that progression would look like, I know that your MTLD would be super pumped to talk through personal growth and what that looks like over the course of the year. Social, political, cultural consciousness. If we look at meets expectation, we want to make sure that you're making an explicit reference to the systems of power and privilege in your school, district, or state context. So for example, if you're a teacher in Waianae and you see that the rates of high school completion or college enrollment are significantly lower for Native Hawaiian students, then we want to see that data and how it's impacting the goals or vision that you're setting for your class. And it may also include reflections about your personal identity. I'm a white woman who moved to a community where I was very much in the minority, and that impacted the way that I needed to think about working with my students and how I showed up in the classroom. And so you may also include reflections about your personal identity. And then content area should be pulled into this as well. So for example, using diverse texts in an English classroom, gender equity in STEM. So you might have a vision around having more of your female students enrolling in AP Physics, as an example. So these are all interrelated. Like you can see that there's some connection to academic growth as well, but it's through the lens of social, political, and cultural consciousness. And then finally, we have access. So to meet expectations on the access broader outcome, what we're looking for is the vision demonstrating an understanding of students' academic path after this school year. So for example, if they're in your algebra class, you know that they need to go to geometry and then algebra 2 and then maybe calculus or probability and statistics. And your vision should include the use of door opening assessments. So for example, using the ACT would be an example of access if you're really clear about how the ACT is going to help students on their educational trajectory. But you may not be 100% clear about how those assessments provide access. It might be more general. That's why it meets expectations and not exceeds. And then you may also include some references to engaging students, influencers, but might not have a plan to do that. So access might be working with students' coaches or advisors for their clubs to make sure that they're meeting expectations or showing up to class or whatever it is that you see as like the access point for your kiddos. This section of your vision should be responsive to that. And again, for each of these sections, your MTLD is going to be the one with the most context about your school community and your classroom, and they would be very excited to talk you through each of these. Okay, a few examples here for vision life hacks. First, I highly recommend that you revisit your notes from orientation, where you did several stations around the room and explored ideas relative to each of the 4 broader outcomes. And then just start drafting, start getting some ideas down on paper. It doesn't have to be perfectly organized. We included some examples here at tinyurl.com/vision examples, which should show you that there's no set format, but we do want to make sure that you're hitting the broader outcomes. And specifically, you need to be fully fleshing out 2 of the broader outcomes to be graded. And then you're going to talk with your MTLD. Give them a call. Some of you already signed up for vision check-ins with your MTLD. And I'm sure your MTLDs have offered themselves to have conversations about vision. Believe me, I work with all of them and they are hungry to talk to you about vision. And then once you have a solid draft in place, you're going to choose the 2 broader outcomes that you want graded. So you can either put in red at the top of your vision, grade, access, and academic growth, or you can highlight the sections that you want graded. But it should be abundantly clear to somebody who is not familiar with that document which sections you want graded, because you don't want them to guess. You want us to be grading the ones that you put the most energy into. And then you're going to submit to Blackboard or Google Classroom by October 9th at midnight. Anything I missed, Al?
Nope, I'll just reiterate that while we're only grading 2 broader outcomes this time, make sure that you do include notes for the other 2 broader outcomes as well, because your MTLD may have thoughts in the feedback cycle now about those, which will just help set us up for success next semester.
Awesome. Great recommendation. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to your MTLD or your instructional mentors. Each of them have drafted visions for their own classroom. And so I'm sure they'd be excited to talk to you about yours. And if you have any questions about general ARC requirements, reach out to my girl, Allie. Email's on the screen, and we're happy to help. Thanks.